Why don't we test this out, David? Why don't we test your audio out? Give us a little bit of a rundown here. Tell us a little bit about where you are in the U.S., a little bit about the farm at home.
Okay, well, I'm on the East Coast. Wait, let me. All right, let's try that now. I'm on the East Coast near about 60 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. We farmed the land there at Jamestown, actually, when Captain John Smith came and settled it in Jamestown Island in 1607. We farmed what's now called Mainland Farm, 1609. So when you talk about history, it started right here, there, Andrew. And, we north banks of the James River, so we're, it's tidal, so we got great water, except when it turns off dry.
Well, I believe that now. It was one thing, and it kind of relates to this. You. Oh, you can't hear me now? Oh, because you've just muted me. We'll have to flip you on and off as you talk, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, and this kind of relates, before we get into some of the strategies, you have when it comes to getting big bushels on corn. One of the comments you made a couple of weeks ago, I thought was relevant to this, where you are farming. What makes it so unique that only you can get high yield corn? Or is it not quite that? Just what's that soil type like?
Well, we're a fine sandy loam soil. And, when you say unique, that only I can farm like this, everybody thinks we got a magic piece of dirt. And that is far from the case. We have 5 center pivots that have had over 500 bushels corn. We're in 2 different counties that's done that, and 30 some miles apart, different soil types. So it's a program. It's not something that is just unique on their particular soil type. And when we started farming the Western farm and we took that same mentality over there and started seeing successes, that took time to build it. You're not going to do it overnight. It's a system. And also the neat thing about our fine sandy loam soil, I can sometimes screw the soil up and fix it in the same year. When you get into the higher CEC soils, that's a bigger struggle because it takes time. We're dealing with CECs from 2.1 to 6.7 is the highest. So that is pretty sandy, and some of it, if we had water on it, it'd be a beach there, Andrew.
So then, when we do talk about that process is what it really is for you. And maybe we can start right at the beginning. I don't know whether it starts with hybrid selection in the fall when you're talking to your Pioneer rep, but kind of give me an idea of where does it start? What did you start when you were starting to plan for the 2025 season?
First thing I tell growers when you start, we need to be able to measure things. And I measure things by starting with a soil sample. We actually pulled 1 acre grid soil samples on our entire farm last December, so we knew what we had to fix. And number one is pH. We focused on that, and then we start looking at other things, our phosphorus to zinc ratio, or base out of potash, and then some micronutrients. After we've gotten that box checked, then the next thing is we got to get our planter squared away. And everybody says, well, I've been planting corn all my life, but I bet they wouldn't look at their planter the same after they watch me look at my planter. So the details that we pay attention to, double disc openers, how the gauge wheels are, the closing system, is it running level? So the plant, but then get to what you're wanting to talk about, Andrew, is corn. How do we go about selecting their hybrids? Everybody has a chance to have a relationship with their influencer, whether it's their Pioneer rep, an agronomist out there. We look at data. Sometimes we'll have impact trials on our farm. Sometimes we don't. We look at those, but then we plan a corn hybrid trial every year. I'm looking at their new stuff as well as stuff that we've been using in the past. And then we look at, particular characteristics of corn. First we measure based off yield, but then also it's got to stand. If it doesn't stand, how miserable is it to harvest corn that doesn't stand? Then we look at plant health, is it going to stay green? Look at test weight, inherent characteristics of it, disease tolerant, and And we deal with corn earworms. So I'm a big Viterra trait person. So we like that. You know, corn borers not a big deal for us, and rootworms not a big deal for us, thank goodness. And then it's just a process right after that, Andrew.
Well, you mentioned before, I think it's a really relevant topic is the planter, what you do to prepare your planter, because it is so tied to, what I know you mentioned and have mentioned before as one of the single most important, and maybe that's not exactly a fair statement, but I remember what your single most important factor is for high yielding corn, and it is tied to that planter. So what are you doing to prepare it, and what is that single most important piece?
Well, if you were to come to my warehouse today, here it is, March something another. We're going to be planting corn in 2-3 weeks. You would say there's no way, because my planter's still tore apart. We've been putting it back together. We got a little rain last night, so I have time to do it. But double disc openers, they talk about the old business card method where you put your double disc openers on and you put the 2 business cards, the touch point, and then they say you want it to be 1.5 to 2 inches. And then you do that 4 times, you spin the wheel. I go a step further. I go to the John Deere dealership. I get the blades. I got a jig there, a meter that can tell if it's got a warp or not. And actually, we'll spin the blades on the air jig. And I want for my rows to be less than 20 thousandths of an inch between the 2 double disc openers. It took me 267 blades at the dealership to find 32 blades that would meet my spec. So where we can you put the 2 blades together and there's going to be less than 20 thousandths of an inch wobble between the 2 blades total. So it'd be like a 15 next to a 5 or 2 10s or a 20 next to a 0, which is true. Then it just comes to gauge wheels. And, Misty and Bill Bauer, they spent a lot of time talking about how to properly set up a planter. Gauge wheels, you put it on a planter, you don't want to pick it up and let it drop and hear it go thump. You want to see that gauge wheel drag down on the double disc openers. And then just basics. How many times do you go walk behind a planter and see that your closing wheels aren't centered? And then the other thing is T-handle. Each row is an individual row. Andrew, you talked about, our soil. But imagine that planter, if a guy's got 16 rows, 12 rows, or 24-row planters, and just an 8-row planter. Each unit is its own. And on their 16-row planter, I have one row that's 3 holes different on the T-handle than the others. So you don't have to always have the T-handles in the same hole. You want to make sure that of all things I'm going to say today, this is probably one of the most important. You want to make sure your germination depth, not your seed depth, but your germination depth is that 2 inches. We can plant 2 inches, and then what happens when you get rain? You get rain, the soil pushes down. Well, that plant depth, the germination depth went from 2 inches to whatever compression you had. It might be 1.5 inches. Andrew, how important is it to have seed at the right depth? Pretty important, in my opinion.
So then let's talk about that, preparing that seed bed to make sure that does help. What are you doing to prepare that seed bed ahead of planting? And then you mentioned you're looking at planting corn in the next couple of weeks. How important, how critical is that early planting date?
Well, I used to be a guy, Andrew, that would plant on the calendar. We had a small planter planting a couple thousand acres of corn, and you just had to get started. So if the ground was fit the last week of March, we were planting corn. Now, fit is different from one grower to the next. Fit for us was if it was just dry enough. Today, we're running a 16-row planter, similar acres. We can start and stop. We can wait till conditions are right. Is the soil warm enough, or do we have a warming trend? And there's nothing more annoying than the weatherman telling you that in 3 days, the temperatures are going to drop. You stop the planter, all your neighbors are still planting, and then the weatherman's wrong. You wish you'd have kept going. But if temperatures start dropping, I want so many GDUs, 40 to 60 GDUs in the next 5 days, depending on what hybrid we're planting. And then I don't really worry about what condition or temperature the soil is as long as we're on a warming trend, because it's going to warm up because we're sandy soil. Now, to go back to how we're making sure our ground is fit, we got our fertilizer out. We're in a never-till environment. We don't do any tillage except where we run a strip till. And we haven't done any strip tilling this spring yet. We like to start in February and try to finish up about the end of March, but it's been too wet. We got 5 inches of rain Sunday. We got 1.1 inches yesterday. Just can't seem to get a break. I just hope the good Lord remembers that we got corn in the ground this summer and he keeps giving us rain. But we run a strip till when we're doing it, put out fertilizer. We run a soil warrior, which when I think about strip tilling, that's the only machine I've ever used. And then we're putting out some fertilizer, some humic acid with that, and then working up that zone, about 6.5, 7 inches. But when we go to comparing where we plant in a no-till environment to our strip till environment, you have to be cognizant and change your seeding depth because we know we're going to get that compaction of that looser soil versus the no-till soil. So that's their tillage. We don't do any vertical tillage. We don't chisel plow or disc anything. So we're no-till or strip till, Andrew.
So then you get that corn planted. Kind of give me an idea of what that process looks like. Especially as that seed is germinating, coming up, you're getting to that first, few leaf stage when it is so critical for that plant to get going.
Well, when I think about our planter, we have a no-till culture in the front. Residue is not a big deal for us. I mean, we got heat in the wintertime. We got moisture, obviously, because I just said we had a bunch of rain, but we've had moisture all winter long. So residue decays. So no-till culture is in place for one purpose, to loosen that soil for the double disc openers. Because if we don't, we'd have to replace it because we're sandy soil. So we want those double disc openers to try to last the whole season. Also on our planter, we have 2 ways or mechanisms to put out fertilizer. We're putting out fertilizer in a 3-inch zone beside the row and about 4 inches deep, as deep as we can get it with the John Deere heavy-duty single disc opener. And then we're putting out products in the trench with the seed. Now, on the side placement, what we call starter. Now, starter is not with the seed. Starter is beside the planter. We're putting out roughly 66 pounds of nitrogen, 30-some pounds of phosphate, some sulfur, some boron, and some zinc. Then we add some humic acid and, maybe some biologicals if we're wanting to do some trials there. Then we've also used some fungicides there, just to give a little bit more protection season long. Now, in the seed trench, the only fertilizer we put in the seed trench is zinc. Now, we also add plant growth promoters. We add some humic acid, and then we might add some biologicals or some probiotic fungicides or biological fungicides in the seed trench. But no nitrogen, no phosphorus, no potash, sulfur, zinc, or boron, just zinc. That is it. Then our focus is trying to get the corn to come up uniformly. We feel like we've managed to control the seeding depth. We've got a good closing system. We run the furrow force from precision, so we're breaking any sidewall compaction. We get that crop to come up. If we can get it to come up in 7 to 10 days, we feel we've checked the box. Then we start doing flagging trials. I don't know if people in the audience has ever done a flag emergence trial. Go to Precision Planting, check on that, and that's when you're just putting flags out there to see based on when the corn comes up. It takes some time, but it's going to help you judge your successes. If we get the corn to come up uniformly, then it's like, okay, now we're checking another box. This feels still something we can focus on. Then, Andrew, we pull a tissue sample at V3, that 350 to 400 GDUs. I look at the tissue sample, and then tell me if it's a crop worth pushing or if it's just regular corn. Something that early we can identify if we can push the crop pretty hard.
What makes the difference? What are you looking for in that tissue sample?
Well, the only nutrient I'm focused on is phosphorus. And I would challenge most growers, if y'all haven't pulled a tissue sample that early, somewhere in that V3 stage, because think about what the plant's doing at V3. It's stopped living off the seed energy. It's starting to photosynthesize. But we want to get the beginning of the reproductive cycles, it's starting that early. And if we see a phosphorus level in excess of 0.4 to 0.5, we know that's a crop that we can really start pushing. And I would challenge most growers to see where their numbers are, because most of them are going to be in that 0.25, 0.3. To give you a little hint,
right now,
the highest corn we've ever harvested was with Pioneer 14A30.
I found that out this morning.
We had a phosphorus level of
Hey,
0.91.
Sorry, Jeff, do you mind muting your mic?
Wait, you got to say it again.
No, sorry. No, perfect. You're good, David. Sorry, we just had somebody else talking. You're good. Keep going.
Yeah. So I would struggle. I don't want to struggle. I would challenge y'all to do the flag trial. Go on Precision website, or they'll send you some free flags. Do that, and then pull a tissue sample just to see where you are. And the higher the number, the better chance you have to have good success. If we have good uniform immersion, first and foremost.
So then one of the questions that came through the chat box, and certainly if anybody else on the call has a question, throw it in the chat box, or there's the Q&A section. By all means, ask away. I'll keep an eye on it. But one of the questions came from Richard. What's the humic acid doing for you? What do you feel the benefit of it is?
We like to put humic acid both in the starter as well as in furrow. From a standpoint, humic acid is not feed biology. It gives biology a workspace to work in. It also as a function of chelating some nutrients. So like in our starter, the side placement, where we're putting the nitrogen and the phosphorus, the sulfur, and the boron, it's helping keep that from moving, leaching out. And then it's just allowing the availability of that nutrient more efficiently. We've seen that. Now, fulvic acid is a different product that you would want to use when you're foliar applying nutrients, but humic, we've had great success with that. And it seems like it buffers the salt injury. When you've got that big band of fertilizer in the starter, that 60-some pounds of nitrogen and some phosphate and sulfur, and that root hits it, sometimes if you don't get much rain, that could be a burning point. But when we've added that humic acid, it's given that buffer. And we've seen that when we're spraying on top of our cereal crop. We add humic acid. We use a product called Black Label Zinc from Nutrien with their 32% nitrogen, and it really mitigates and takes away the foliar burn. And if it can do that on the leaf, it's also going to do that on the root. Andrew?
James had a question too, that when we were talking about that tissue sample and at V3, you're aiming for a 0.4, 0.5. Maybe mine's coming in at a 0.25. Is there anything I can do to get mine to a 0.4, or is it kind of like a corrective action that I can take, or is it too late, too bad?
Well, first and foremost, you gotta have the foundation. And, that's one of the things that we do at Total Acre. That group, Randy Dowdy and I work, and we got members in Canada that are part of Total Acre or not. We have a program. We have what's called must-dos. And some of those, you would think initially would be, let's put phosphorus in the seed trench. Well, that's not what you want to do, because that's going to give the plant an artificially sense that it has plenty of phosphorus there. And then when it needs it later, it's going to run out. And what I'm referring to by there is, think about the plants. The roots are sending out a sweat. They are releasing some sugars in the root, out of the root, and the name escapes me right now. So, but they're releasing these products out of the roots, and if we have phosphorus in the seed trench, the plant thinks that it has all the phosphorus it needs. Then when later on it gets to the growth stage where it needs more phosphorus, now it's not sending out those sweat, per se, that tell the biology in the soil we need more phosphorus. when I talked about that to my granddad several years ago, he just thought I would bump my head. But it truly is. There's interaction going on between the plant and the biology in the soil. Now, if you do have low numbers, you've already missed the boat. You can never make bushels. And the highest yields we ever have is when we open up the bag of that Pioneer bag of seed. After we plant it, the yields are only going in one direction, down. We just want to lower the curve because, they're going to be dropping fast. We want to flatten it out to where we can capture as much of those bushels as possible. So, unfortunately, if the levels are low, try another field, do something different. The cool thing about us planting it, I want to plant 3-4 weeks. I don't want to plant it all in a week because I'll pick the wrong week and we'll have some bad weather in the summertime. So we do different things and we'll check and see how it affects it. Also, if the conditions are warmer, therefore you'll get more phosphorus. So, when we plant when it's cold, biology is not moving very fast. So try to hit the brakes a little bit if you can. But not everybody has the ability to sit and wait as long as we do.
Yeah. So then we kind of got to V3 so far in your corn crop. Let's say that corn is a crop you want to push. What are you doing after that? Fertility-wise, let's start with fertility.
Sure. Well, we tissue sample every week. I've been tissue sampling every week for over 2 decades now, and that's something Total Acre does. And not that we have to tissue sample every week. It just gives you a reference point. If you've never done it, at least you get a point to say, hey, this is what has been a problem for us, and this is how we are able to fix it. So we're tissue sampling, we're spraying the herbicides, but then nutrition-wise, we feel like that starter is going to get us to V8 to where, not that I need to side dress corn, but I know I have enough nitrogen there to get me to V8. But I'm going to go in and start side dressing before that. The reason we put a big slug of nitrogen, we run one sprayer, Andrew, and that sprayer is running on small grain, soybean herbicides, corn herbicides. Side dressing corn is not always the highest priority for that. So we don't want the crop to ever run out. So we put enough at the planting time to get us to a particular stage. But at V3, we've learned we do what we call a micronutrient cocktail pass. We'll go out there and spray a micro blend. A fellow by the name of Philip Davis shared that with me probably 12 or 13 years ago. And no nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, sulfur, just micronutrients. Get the plant balanced because the plant, if you give it the NPK and sulfur, it's just like you giving your kids some candy or vegetables. Which one are they going to eat? They're going to eat the candy. That's what the crop's going to want. So we force it to take some of these other nutrients, and then that gets it balanced. Then we go in and side dress their corn. We're putting nitrogen, we're putting sulfur out, we put boron, and we're putting moly and adding humic acid. And after that, we'll come back, we'll continue to tissue sample. If it's a crop that we're going to push, we'll side dress through easy drops 3 times throughout the growing season. And then if we need to, we'll add some fertigation on top of that. And then we'll add some micronutrients if necessary. That's why we pull tissue samples.
What about the what kind of fungicides? Like how important are they? How often are you doing it? You talked about kind of being warm and damp. I'm guessing it's a pretty critical thing for you.
Well, first and foremost, their number one early obstacle is Pythium or damping off. You would think because we're sandy soils that wouldn't be a big problem, but we do deal with that. So we've tried some Infer products like Ethos or Double Nickel. We're playing with a product called Instago from Genesis Ag. It's like a probiotic. So that's how we kind of address their Pythium or damping off. Then from season-long protection, we have Xyway in the starter. We've played with that for the last couple of years and have had good success. That will carry us throughout till, I would say, tasseling and a little pass. You don't want to put Xyway in the trench with the seeds. That'd be something beside placement. Before we were doing Xyway, we were spraying it with our herbicides, our Preaxtar fungicide, and then at tassel time we would do Veltima. We started out with Headline Amp, then we transitioned to Veltima, and then later on we'll do another application of Veltima. And because of our irrigated and our high humidities, we do get a fair amount of disease. Sometimes southern rust becomes a problem. The blights are a problem. Gray leaf spot can be a problem for us. We've been blessed not to have tar spot yet. And I don't know if tar spot's a big issue with the guys up in Canada, but you got to be proactive on that one. And then I would really, there's some probiotic type natural fungicide. I would challenge growers to start looking in that arena because, it's exciting what's coming about. And just play with them, leave a strip with and without, compare it to your normal fungicide program. And I'm a believer that there are places for some of that.
Because how do you go about, there's so many when you talk about probiotics, biologicals, all of this space, there's just so many. How do you go about trying to determine, okay, this is the one we're going to actually go into test? And then what's that process for testing for you to make sure that it actually could work?
Okay, well, if you went to the Commodity Classic like you were there in Denver, there was a lot of them. Around every corner, there was a booth that was talking about biologicals, PGR,
and they all work amazing.
Whether they're probiotics. so it becomes challenging. Now, the one thing, if we as growers, we get a lot of people drive down their lane and then want to talk to us and ask what's going on. The question I would get you to ask them is, how do you measure its success? And then you hold their feet to their fire. So if they say, hey, we got a probiotic or a biological that's going to do this, I want to know how to measure it. Don't just tell me we're going to have better plant health. Explain to me how I'm going to get better plant health. And then is that going to come up with higher tissue levels? Are we going to have a bigger root system? Are we going to see something different? And a grower needs to, when they apply something, they need to have a control. A grower will never give up something that he knows pays, but how do you know it pays if you don't have a with and without? So we start out, we'll try some products in furrows, starter, foliar, and then we'll leave a control beside it, and then we'll measure that. I'm not a guy that's going to try a lot of acres with something new. I'm going to try a little bit. Unfortunately, corn changes faster than the biologicals do, because seed corn, we only have 3-4 years of a hybrid that is gone. Biologicals, they have a tendency to stick around, and then they stack on top of it. But there are companies now. Everybody can't test everything, so partner with other groups. You got neighbors. Hey, you try this one. Well, we'll try this one. I got relationship with growers that do that. That's one of the things Total Acre does. We have all these trials, and I know I keep saying Total Acre. So if you hadn't looked at Total Acre, look at that as an option for a grower. But other growers are trying stuff. So working some kind of network like that, Andrew.
Now, it sounds like one of the, with all of these applications, whether it's fertility, whether it's fungicide, whatever it is, one of the things you're doing to gauge whether it's successful or not is obviously yield, but in the middle of that is all those tissue samples. You're doing it weekly. Rolly's asked, are you doing a field tissue tester? Do you have that? Are you sending it to a lab? How are you making sure that the results you're getting are as accurate as you want them to be?
Well, this is interesting because when you do tissue samples, there are a lot of ways to do it. Some people go out in the field and just randomize, pick a tissue sample. I'm trying to compare myself this year to last year or the last 25, 30 years. So I picked one row of my corn planter because we're putting out fertilizer, and then we're coming in and side dressing or easy dropping air crop. So I picked one row. I don't always know that the same amount of fertilizer came out of each row of my corn planter. So why am I going to randomize and mix it up? So that's why I stay down one row. Then I send that sample to a lab down at Southeast Ag Lab down in Georgia. That's the lab that Total Acre works with. I also send samples to Waypoint, which is only 30 some miles away from me. I can get the result, send the samples there about 10 o'clock that morning. I'll have the results by 11 the next day. So we do that just as a yardstick to compare ourselves. Are we on track? Are we having a problem? You know, y'all deal with smoke up there. I think y'all had some smoke last couple of years. You know, is smoke causing problems? So let's just understand what's going on. And then if you've had a wet year, a dry year, do we have compaction? You know, that's one great way to identify if you got compaction. If your tissue levels are lower, and then from a previous year, take a penetrometer and see what's going on. You might have a problem. Your roots can't get to your nutrients. So we use that as a yardstick. We are playing with the company called Crop Diagnostics. That's something new about, where they're reading RNA, and we'll be taking leaf samples with a hole puncher, like you're making a hole punch on a piece of paper to put in a file cabinet or a file folder. And then we'll send those off. So there's a lot of neat things coming out, Andrew.
Aaron's asked a question, and we're just getting towards the end here. I know we've got a few minutes over. I thought we'd do that just to kind of catch up on what we missed off the bat. But Aaron asked a question, David, in terms of other talks he's heard you give that's about pushing that dent out of dent corn to try to get it to be heavier corn. I guess the question is, how is that going? And what do you do to try to get that test weight that much higher, that heavy weight?
Okay. I get this question a lot. How can you make corn not dent, and how can you make corn heavy? You know, I wish I could see the whole audience, because it's like a little cool exercise. It's like an auctioneer. I'm not an auctioneer, but I'd say, you know, what's your average test weight? And growers will say, hey, I'm 56 pounds. And I say, do I get a 57? Do I get a 58? Do I get a 59? The highest test weight we've ever recorded was 66.1 pounds. And I can't recall the year, but one year I had a focus that I said, let's see if we can make some corn not dent. Now, there are not things that I can solely take responsibility for. The good Lord's got to bless us with a cool grain field period of time. We got to have a lot of sunlight. We have to have low temperatures, particularly low nighttime temperatures. And you guys up in Canada can beat us on that. Because last year, you know, during that whole grain field period of time, we were waking up, it was 82 to 87 degrees in the morning. So corn is not doing well. Test weight, you know, we felt like we accomplished something to have 60, 61 pound corn last year. So test weight, keep the plant healthy and green. Make sure when you go to harvest your corn, the crop is still green, because that is allowing the leaf to photosynthesize and put as much energy into that kernel. Sugars are good. I would also challenge you, and I can give you all answers, but I think the best thing for you, some growers do, is try to figure it out themselves. Take a sample of corn, have it analyzed, grind it up, take it to a lab, and ask them to tell you what kind of nutrients are in that kernel of corn. And based on what's in that kernel of corn, start thinking about, well, that's the nutrients I need to be sure to have in abundance for that time to fill that kernel of corn out. The universities do a great job telling us how many pounds or ounces of nutrients it takes to grow a crop. They separate it into the stalk, and then they separate it into the grain. So as a grower, you know, we got to take ownership sometime, but figure out what percentages are in that grain, and then start thinking, how can I force that plant to get more of those nutrients in on a timely manner? And I bet they figure it out themselves, Andrew.
Well, and just as we wrap up here, I've got kind of a final question, and then we'll say goodbye and let everybody kind of get on with their day. But you've gone through a pile of things, I think, that we as growers should be looking at, right from that soil sample, hybrid selection, planter, fertility, tissue sampling, all the products that can go in, all of that. Is there a secret weapon to this? You've been able to do this, year after year after year. What's your secret weapon, David?
Well, I say there's only three things to grow. Oh, I forgot to mute you. I say there's only three things to grow high yield in corn. Good Lord's got to bless you. You got to use Pioneer seed, and you got to have John Deere paint. With those three things, anything can happen. But I'm sure you wouldn't be amazed. Most people want that one product that they can pour in the spray inductor that's going to give them bushels. A great example how we overcome these. That 15, 17 years ago, however it was, when Philip Davis mentioned to us about this micronutrient cocktail. We put that out at V3, onset of V4. We picked up 27 to 32 bushels of corn. Now, that was what was holding us back. So the biggest struggle growers have is they got to figure out what's their limiting factor. And then once you find it and you make that application, boom, you just push through that ceiling tile. Then, unfortunately, now we've created another limiting factor. So we realize that we know which ones are because of our history of tissue sampling. But, Andrew, the first thing is we got to have the right hybrid in the right acre. We have to get it to come up uniformly. Then once we do that, we pull that first tissue sample. If it looks good then we go to the next step, and then we start side dressing. And then we go to the next step. Then we start making another foliar spray. Then we go to the next step, and we side dress again. And the other thing is we don't put all this fertilizer out up front because I don't know if we're going to have a 300 bushel crop, a 350 or plus. So I can't waste and spend all this money. That's why we spoon feed it. And that's one of the advantages of having their lower CEC soil. We can do that and it responds quickly. We might be dribbling on potash, or we might come in and start easy dropping some phosphate with some other product out there just to help stimulate some phosphorus later in the season. So there is no one thing. I wish there was. The one thing that I wish they could make would be sunlight in a jug. Because when we get those cloudy days, it would be great to have that and then something to cool the canopy down. We do a lot to help the crop transpire. We're big on potash, but then we're big on plant health, keeping the plant green, and that helps it cool down. But when you got your cool nights that y'all have up there, test weight and good yields, I'm excited to hear what's going to happen in 2025, Andrew.
Well, and I'm excited to hear, what you're able to achieve as well, David. David, it's been really great to have you join us this morning. Appreciate your patience with the technical side of things, but this really has been fantastic. And I think the question that I'm taking away from this webinar that I got to solve is what's my limiting factor in 2025. So, David, thanks very much for joining us here on the Yield Hero East webinar. Everybody else who's joining us, we appreciate you taking some time this morning to do that. Keep an eye on your inbox for the next webinar that will be coming soon. David and everybody else, enjoy your Friday, and David, safe planting when you get there in a couple of weeks.
God bless y'all, and look forward to seeing y'all in San Antonio.
That'd be wonderful. Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Enjoy Friday.